Lonely rancher fought off wolves to save Apache girl. Next day, her mother came. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The gunshot cracked across the canyon like a church bell at midnight. But it was the scream that followed, a young Apache girl's cry, sharp as broken glass, that made Caleb Hawthorne's blood run cold. Most men would have turned their horses the other way. Most men in the desert learned early that a man's business was his own, and survival came from looking after your own skin. But Caleb was not most men. He had already seen too much death and carried too much of it on his conscience to leave a child to be torn apart in the dark. He reined in his black stallion, the animal's ears flicking nervously toward the sound. The desert was alive with echoes, the faint yips of coyotes, the restless hiss of the night wind through the sagebrush, and beneath it all, the low growl of something hungry. Caleb's hand went to the Winchester in its scabbard, fingers brushing the worn wood as if to steady himself. The moon hung full and white above the red cliffs, silvering the world below. He dismounted silently, spurs barely whispering against the rock. Every nerve was taut as he moved forward, slipping between boulders, eyes scanning for movement. The stench of blood was thick now, coppery, sharp, and with it came the sound he dreaded, the frantic whimper of a girl trying not to cry. 20 yards ahead, a small Apache camp lay in ruin. 2 elders, an old man and woman, sprawled near a dying fire, their blood soaking into the sand. The canvas shelter was shredded, supplies scattered like leaves in a storm. And beyond the wreckage, 3 wolves prowled in a slow circle, their silver coats dark with gore. Behind an overturned wagon, the girl crouched. No more than 14 or 15, with long dark hair tangled in her face, she held a broken stick like it might be a sword. Her wide eyes glimmered with moonlight and terror, fixed on the predators that tightened the circle around her. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. It wasn't just wolves he saw. It was memory. Children crying at Crying Woman Creek. Families cut down under cavalry guns. A trail of ashes that still stained his soul. He whispered to himself, the words surfacing unbidden from the book he had long abandoned. Rescue those being led away to death. Hold back those staggering toward slaughter. Proverbs 24:11. His grip steadied on the Winchester. The largest wolf, ribs sharp against its skin, lips curled back to show teeth white as bone, stepped closer to the girl. Its golden eyes flicked toward the wagon. Then the wind shifted and it froze. Its head swung, nostrils flaring. It smelled him. All 3 wolves turned as one, low growls rumbling like distant thunder. The hunt was no longer theirs alone. Caleb raised the rifle. 3 shots, 3 wolves, no room for error. Time stretched thin as glass. He drew a breath, finger tightening on the trigger. The desert held its breath with him. The rifle roared, the shot cracking the silence apart. The lead wolf staggered, a blossom of blood darkening its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it loosed a furious snarl and charged, claws tearing up the sand. Caleb worked the lever by instinct, chambering another round. The second wolf darted left, its yellow eyes fixed on him, moving with the silent grace of death itself. He pivoted, sighted, and squeezed the trigger. The shot took it mid-stride, spinning it sideways before it crashed to the ground in a lifeless heap. But the first wolf kept coming. Caleb braced, fired again. The rifle bucked, the beast dropped at his boots with a final rattling growl. For an instant, the canyon was still. Then the third wolf moved. It hadn't rushed in like the others. No, this one was clever. It circled wide, keeping to the shadows, tail low, waiting for the right opening. Caleb could see the intelligence in its eyes as it tracked him, gauging every shift of his weight. He snapped the rifle up, aimed, click. The chamber was empty. The wolf knew. It lowered itself, haunches coiled like springs, lips wet with hunger. Caleb felt the old familiar calm settle over him, the same calm that had carried him through gunfights, through cavalry charges, through nights when he hadn't expected to live until dawn. Slowly, he reached for the Colt on his hip. The wolf exploded forward. In one fluid motion, Caleb cleared leather and fired. The first shot tore into its shoulder, twisting the beast mid-leap. The second struck home, slamming into its chest. It crumpled at his feet, jaws snapping once in reflex before it lay still, eyes fading to glass. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Caleb stood a long moment, revolver smoking, listening for more. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind and the faint cry of a night bird. He holstered the Colt and turned toward the wagon. The girl hadn't moved. She crouched there trembling, knuckles white around her broken stick, staring at him as if she couldn't decide whether he was savior or monster. Caleb stopped several paces away, lowering his hands so she could see they were empty. His voice was low, careful. "I won't hurt you." She blinked, eyes darting to the dead wolves, then back to him. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The terror in her gaze wasn't only for the beasts he'd slain, it was for him, too. A white man, armed, standing among the bodies of her kin. He remembered enough Apache words from his scouting days to try. He touched his chest. Caleb. Then he pointed to the wolves, drew a hand across his throat. Gone. The girl's breath hitched. Slowly, she lowered the stick, though her shoulders stayed tight with mistrust. Caleb's gaze softened. She was thin, too thin, and her moccasins were worn nearly to nothing. She'd fought to survive this long, but the desert was merciless. She wouldn't last alone. Whatever else lay ahead, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't leave her. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments. Caleb knelt by the wagon, setting his rifle aside. The girl flinched as he moved closer, pressing her back against the wood. She looked more like a cornered fox than a child, eyes wide, lips pale, her knuckles white around the splintered stick she still clutched. "I'm not your enemy," he said quietly, though he doubted she understood the words. Slowly, he unhooked his canteen and set it on the ground between them. He nudged it forward with 2 fingers, then leaned back on his heels, hands open and empty. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, with trembling fingers, she snatched up the canteen, unscrewed the cap, and drank. The sound of water slipping down her throat seemed louder than the night wind. Caleb noticed the raw scrapes across her arms, the cuts on her feet where thin moccasins had failed to protect her. She was thin, too thin, like a wild thing forced to live on whatever scraps she could find. Her ribs pressed against her tunic, her cheeks hollowed with hunger. He wondered how many days she had gone without a full meal. When she had taken enough, she pushed the canteen back toward him. He shook his head, gesturing for her to keep it. She studied him with suspicion, but tucked it close. He turned toward the camp, gathering what remained. A blanket half torn by claws, a pouch of dried meat the wolves had missed, a flint knife. Not much, but enough to keep her alive for another day. He brought the blanket back, spreading it near the wagon. The girl hesitated, then sank down onto it, her small frame shivering in the desert chill. Caleb's hands moved to his satchel, pulling out a strip of cloth. He crouched beside her, waiting for permission she didn't give. When she didn't resist, he wrapped the cloth around the gash on her arm. His touch was steady, gentle, but his mind wasn't. The blood on his hands, the girls, the wolves, the elders, called up other memories. Faces from years past, children screaming in the smoke at Crying Woman Creek. Orders barked by officers, rifles raised, fire consuming Apache lodges. Caleb had ridden with them, he'd seen it, he'd done it. That was when something inside him broke. He had thrown down his uniform, fled the army, and never looked back. But the stain of it clung to him like dust on his boots. He had told himself he was finished with fighting other people's wars, that he wanted nothing more than to drift from town to town, nameless and rootless. And yet here he was, staring into the dark eyes of a girl who should have hated him, who would have every reason to see him as a murderer. A faint sound brought him back, the girl whispering. Her voice was soft, lilting, a string of words in Apache.
Caleb caught only fragments. He thought she had asked if he meant her harm. He shook his head slowly, then tapped his chest. "Caleb," he said again. Her lips moved, a single word slipping past. "Ayasha." The name lingered in the air like a prayer. Caleb nodded. At least now they were no longer strangers. He leaned back against the wagon, his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the desert shadows.
He would keep watch tonight. She needed rest. And though he did not know what dawn would bring, he knew one thing for certain. Ayasha could not walk this road alone. The first light of dawn painted the cliffs in crimson and gold. Caleb had not slept. He sat with his rifle across his knees, eyes on the horizon, ears tuned to every rustle of the desert. Beside him, Ayasha stirred beneath the ragged blanket. She blinked at the rising sun, then at him, uncertain whether to trust the world she had woken into. He offered her a strip of dried meat. She took it hesitantly, chewing in silence. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then lifted her gaze toward him. There was fear there still, but also a kind of stubborn courage. "You, soldier?" she asked in broken English. The question hit harder than a rifle butt. Caleb hesitated, then nodded once. Lying would serve no purpose. Her face darkened, but she did not turn away. Instead, she touched her chest. "Father, fight soldiers." Her voice wavered. "Father, dead." Caleb closed his eyes. The words felt like a blade twisting in his gut. How many fathers had he seen fall under blue coats? How many times had his own hands helped load the rifles that tore families apart? "I'm sorry," he said softly, knowing the words were too small, too thin. Ayasha's eyes grew distant, fixed on something beyond him. She whispered more in Apache, voice trembling. Caleb caught fragments, enough to piece together the meaning. Her mother, Sakina, was sick, very sick. The girl had been traveling with her grandparents in search of medicine plants in sacred places when the wolves came. "Mother, far," Ayasha said, pointing southwest toward a line of jagged mountains barely visible in the morning haze. "Hidden place, water." She held up 3 fingers. 3 days' walk, maybe 4. Caleb followed her gesture, studying the horizon. 3 days through the desert, if they had water, if the heat didn't kill them, if outlaws or patrols didn't find them first. It was a fool's journey. And yet he saw the way her voice shook when she said, "Mother," the desperate hope clinging to her every word. Without help, she wouldn't make it. With him, maybe, just maybe, she stood a chance. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something stir inside him. Not the old bitterness, not the endless guilt, but a spark of possibility. Perhaps this road wasn't just about saving her. Perhaps it was about saving himself. The words of Scripture, long buried, rose unbidden to his mind. "If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." 2 Corinthians 5:17. He had been running from his past for so long, but maybe God had placed this girl in his path to show him a different way forward. Caleb looked back at Ayasha. She hugged her knees to her chest, watching him with eyes too old for her years. He nodded slowly. "I'll take you to her. To your mother." Her lips parted, breath catching. For the first time, a flicker of light broke through her guarded expression. She did not smile, she was not ready for that. But her gaze softened, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her small shoulders. Caleb adjusted the saddle on Midnight, his black stallion, then offered a hand to help her mount. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. As the horse started westward, the desert stretched before them, vast, merciless, but no longer empty. Now it carried the weight of a promise. By mid-morning, the sun burned like a furnace in the sky. Heat shimmered off the sand, bending the horizon into a wavering mirage. Midnight plodded forward, sweat glistening on his black coat, while Caleb kept a careful pace. He knew better than to push a horse under this kind of sun.
Ayasha rode in silence behind him, her small hands clutching the saddle horn. She swayed with each step, her dark hair falling across her face. Every so often she glanced at the canteen at her side, but she never raised it to her lips. "Drink," Caleb said, glancing back. "Slow, but steady. Heat'll kill you quicker than hunger." She frowned, not fully understanding, so he mimed the motion, unscrewing, sipping, closing. At last she nodded and obeyed, taking a small swallow before capping the canteen again. They pressed on until the heat became unbearable. Caleb guided Midnight off the trail toward a cluster of boulders where a sliver of shade clung to the rock. He helped Ayasha down, then unsaddled the horse so it could rest. The desert around them was alive in its own way. Cicadas buzzed in the still air, vultures circled far above, and somewhere close by came the dry rattle of warning. Caleb's eyes snapped to the sound. A rattlesnake lay coiled near the rocks, its tongue flicking, tail buzzing. Ayasha froze. Caleb drew his knife, crouching low. He moved slow, steady, waiting for the rhythm of the snake's coil to shift. Then, with one quick strike, he drove the blade down just behind the head. The rattle fell silent. He lifted the limp body and carried it back. Ayasha's eyes widened, torn between fear and awe. "Food," Caleb said simply, tossing the snake aside until later. "Desert gives, desert takes." She repeated the words back in halting English, then answered with her own. "Shush." She tapped the snake. "Apache, shush." Caleb nodded. "Shush." For the next hour they traded words. Water, horse, fire, sky. Some he remembered from his scouting days, others were new to him. Ayasha corrected his clumsy tongue with surprising patience, her expression softening each time he managed a word right. It was a strange rhythm. Two travelers bound by necessity, one teaching survival, the other teaching language. Step by step, lesson by lesson, the silence between them began to fill. When the sun dipped low, they built a small fire. Caleb skinned the rattlesnake, roasting the meat on a stick. Ayasha watched intently, then accepted her portion without hesitation. Hunger had burned away her fear of strange food. As they ate, Caleb studied her. For all her youth, she carried herself with the wary strength of someone forced to grow up too soon. The desert had carved hardship into her, but it hadn't broken her. He found himself wondering what kind of woman she might become, if she survived this journey. That thought alone steeled his resolve. When darkness fell, the desert cooled, stars kindling one by one in the endless sky. Ayasha lay wrapped in the blanket, already drifting toward sleep. Caleb sat nearby, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the night. The wolves had been only the beginning. He could feel it in the air. The land itself was testing them, and the hardest trials were yet to come. By the second night, the land had changed. The open desert gave way to broken mesas and winding gullies, the kind of country where a man could vanish or die unseen. Caleb led Midnight carefully along a dry creek bed, his senses sharp. He knew this terrain. He'd scouted in places like it years ago, leading soldiers through these same canyons. Ayasha rode behind him, her face tight with weariness but her back straight. She hadn't complained once, though her moccasins were worn thin and her feet blistered. The girl had grit, that much was certain. It was the vultures that warned him. They circled low over a ridge ahead, their black wings carving slow spirals in the hot sky. Caleb reined in, scanning the air. Too many girds, too low. Something lay dead ahead. "Stay close," he murmured. He guided Midnight up the slope, the horse's hooves crunching softly on loose stone. At the crest, the scene opened before them, and Caleb's stomach tightened. 8 bodies lay scattered across the creek bed below, their blue coats torn and stained. Horses lay among them, arrows still jutting from their flanks. Rifles, boots, cartridge belts, everything of value had been stripped away. The smell of death hung thick in the air. Ayasha inhaled sharply, whispering a word in Apache, one Caleb knew well enough. Nantan, her grandfather's name. He studied the battlefield with a soldier's eye. The ambush had been swift, brutal, and precise.
The patrol hadn't stood a chance. They'd been caught in the open, funneled into a killing ground.
Every man cut down before he could form a line of defense. He knew this work. He'd seen Apache raids before, and this one bore the mark of a master tactician, Nantan, the old war chief who had outmaneuvered cavalry units for years, slipping through nets that should have caught him. Caleb had once been sent to help hunt him down. Now he was escorting the man's granddaughter straight into his stronghold. The irony was bitter as cactus on his tongue. Ayasha's gaze swept the bodies, her eyes hardening with a pride Caleb hadn't expected. "Warrior strong," she said softly in her halting English. "Bluecoats, no win." Caleb's jaw tightened. He remembered wearing that same blue coat, carrying out orders that had left villages in ashes. Men like these dead soldiers had once been his brothers in arms. Now he stood on the other side of the line, walking willingly into enemy country. For a moment, doubt gnawed at him. If they found him, alone, white, with Nantan's blood beside him, would the Apache listen to reason, or would they string him up with the same efficiency he saw in this battlefield?
He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the thought settle. "You see this, Ayasha?" he said quietly, pointing to the ground. "This is what waits ahead. Men dying, more blood. You sure you want to go on?" Her dark eyes met his, fierce despite her youth. "Mother," she said simply. Then she pointed to the mountains beyond. "We go." Caleb held her gaze for a long moment. In that one word lay all her determination, all her hope. He nodded, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. "Then we go." As they moved on, the vultures dipped lower, settling among the dead. Caleb looked once more at the scene behind them, knowing it was no longer his world. His war was ahead now, not behind. And this time he would fight for something worth saving. By dusk, they found a shallow cave carved into the cliffside. The desert air had cooled, but the rocks still held the day's heat. Caleb guided Midnight inside first, making sure no scorpion or coyote had claimed the hollow. Satisfied, he waved Ayasha in. The cave was small but dry, its walls streaked with smoke from fires long extinguished. As Caleb unpacked their meager supplies, Ayasha wandered deeper, her fingers brushing the stone. She stopped suddenly and let out a soft gasp. Carved into the wall were figures, lines etched by hands long gone. Hunters with bows chasing deer, women gathering roots, a circle of dancers around a fire. The images were simple but alive, carrying the weight of centuries. Ayasha reached toward one panel where a woman bent to embrace two children. Her fingertips hovered just above the lines as if afraid her touch might erase them. In a voice barely louder than the desert wind, she whispered, "Mother." The words seemed to echo through the cave, heavy with yearning. She pressed her forehead against the stone, eyes shut tight. Caleb stood a few paces back, unsure whether to approach. She wasn't just looking at drawings, she was searching for her family in them, for the mother who still lingered somewhere ahead, clinging to life. For the first time since he'd met her, Ayasha looked like a child again. Caleb lowered himself onto one knee, bowing his head. He hadn't prayed in years, not since the army, not since Crying Woman Creek. But the sight of her small figure against the ancient wall broke something open inside him.
"Lord, if you're listening," he thought, "give this girl the strength to see her mother again. And if there's mercy left for a man like me, let me bring her there alive." When he lifted his head, Ayasha was watching him. She didn't speak, but there was something softer in her gaze now, something like trust. They built a small fire at the cave's mouth, the flames flickering against the carvings. Caleb roasted the last of the rattlesnake meat, cutting pieces small enough for Ayasha. She ate quietly, then curled beneath the blanket, her eyes fixed on the glowing embers. Caleb kept watch, rifle across his lap. The desert outside was hushed, as if the night itself held its breath. But in the stillness, he felt the weight of the past pressing close. Faces he could never forget, voices that still haunted his sleep. He looked at Ayasha's sleeping form, then back at the carvings of mothers and children. Maybe this was his chance to put something right. He whispered aloud, his voice barely carrying,
"You'll see her, Ayasha. I'll see to it." The fire cracked softly in answer, sending sparks into the dark. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt a measure of peace.
By the third night, the desert no longer felt empty. Caleb could sense it in the air, the way shadows seemed to linger too long, the way even midnight lifted his head at every whisper of wind. They were no longer alone. As the sun dipped, Ayasha pointed toward the mesas. Tiny flames flickered against the sky, then vanished, then reappeared farther off. Signal fires, the old Apache system of sending word across miles in minutes. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen it before, an entire army's movement tracked by firelight. It meant they were being watched, their steps marked, their presence known. Ayasha didn't seem afraid. She straightened in the saddle, her chin lifting with pride. "Warriors see," she said softly, "we near." Caleb envied her certainty. For him, each flicker of fire was another reminder of what he was. An outsider, a deserter, a man who once wore the blue coat that had brought death to her people. If Nantan's warriors caught him alone, with the chief's granddaughter in his care, would they believe his intentions, or would they put an arrow through his chest before he could speak? They pushed on, keeping to the dry washes and narrow gullies where the firelight could not so easily find them. The moon was high when Caleb finally called a halt. Midnight was blowing hard, sweat slick on his hide, and Ayasha's small frame drooped with exhaustion. He helped her down, guiding her to a patch of soft sand beneath a leaning rock. She sank to the ground, but her eyes remained open, scanning the cliffs above. Even she felt the weight of being hunted. Caleb knelt beside her. "We'll be all right," he said, though he wasn't sure if the words were for her or for himself. She turned her face toward him. "You? Afraid?" He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'd be a fool not to be." He glanced at the mesas, at the dark shapes that might have been rocks or men. "But I've learned something, Ayasha. Being afraid and quitting, they're not the same thing." She seemed to consider this, then nodded. Her small hand reached for the turquoise pendant she wore, the only adornment she had kept through all the chaos. She pressed it against her chest, as if drawing strength from the stone. The night deepened. Coyotes called in the distance, and once Caleb thought he heard the faint thrum of hooves far away. He set his rifle across his lap, eyes never leaving the ridgeline. Every muscle in his body told him the next trial was close. Beside him, Ayasha finally drifted into a shallow sleep, her breaths uneven, her face drawn tight even in rest. She had endured too much, carried too much weight for her years. Caleb swore silently that he would not let the desert, the soldiers, or even her own people take her from him now. Dawn would bring answers. Allies or enemies, welcome or death. Either way, the path forward led deeper into Apache country, and there would be no turning back. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The canyon narrowed into a throat of stone, sheer walls rising on both sides until only a strip of sky remained. Caleb led Midnight carefully, his eyes scanning the ridges above. Too quiet, he thought. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a shadow shifted. From the rocks ahead, a tall figure stepped into their path. His skin was painted with white stripes, his rifle cradled like an extension of his arm. Behind him, 2 more warriors appeared, bows drawn, arrows tipped with gleaming obsidian. Caleb turned, and his stomach tightened. The rear of the canyon was already sealed. Warriors emerged from the stone itself, silent as ghosts, weapons glinting in the fading light. They were surrounded. Ayasha stiffened in the saddle, clutching the horn as Midnight snorted uneasily. Caleb raised a steady hand to calm the horse, though his own pulse thundered in his ears. He counted at least 8 men, maybe more hidden in the shadows. The leader stepped closer. His gaze swept Caleb from hat to boots, cold and sharp as flint. He barked something in Apache, the words sharp with accusation. Caleb caught only fragments, but the tone was clear enough. Spy. Enemy. Ayasha's breath caught.
She slid from the saddle and stepped between Caleb and the warrior, her small frame dwarfed by the men encircling them. She spoke rapidly in her own tongue, her voice trembling but strong. The leader cut her off with a bark, pointing his rifle at Caleb's chest. Caleb slowly lifted his hands, palms open. His revolver stayed holstered, his rifle slung harmless across his back. He could draw, maybe drop one or two, but the girl would die in the storm of arrows that followed. This was no standoff. It was an execution waiting for a signal. The warrior spoke again, his voice low and venomous. He gestured toward Caleb's chest, then spat on the ground. Caleb knew what they saw. Not a savior, but a white soldier. A man who once rode with the bluecoats, whose kind had burned their villages and left their dead in the dust. Ayasha shouted something, desperate, pointing to Caleb, then miming the motion of a rifle, then pointing to the ground where wolves had fallen days before. Her hands moved fast, her voice breaking with urgency. The leader's eyes narrowed, but his rifle did not lower. He glanced at Caleb again, his expression unreadable, then spoke a single word Caleb understood all too well. Spy. The word echoed in the canyon, heavy as a death sentence. Caleb's throat was dry. He could see the arrowheads glinting in the last light of day, sharp as judgment. For the first time since he had left the army, he realized he could not run, not fight, not hide. Every road backward was gone. This was it, the point of no return. Ayasha stood in front of Caleb like a shield, her small body trembling but her voice steady. She pointed again to the man behind her, speaking in a rush of Apache words. Caleb caught fragments, wolves, fire, blood. She was telling them the story, he realized, telling them how he had stood against the beasts when no one else had come. The leader listened without flinching. His face was carved from stone, his eyes unyielding. He barked a sharp reply, and the circle of warriors shifted, tightening like a noose. Ayasha's voice rose. She spread her arms wide, as though to block their weapons with her own body. "No!" she cried in broken English, her voice echoing against the canyon walls. "He save me! He no enemy, no spy!" Caleb's heart wrenched at the sight of her, this girl who had lost so much already, now standing between him and certain death. He wanted to pull her back, shield her, but he dared not move. Any sudden motion might spark a storm of arrows. One of the younger warriors spoke from the circle, his tone skeptical. He gestured at Caleb, then mimed the swing of a saber. Caleb knew what he meant. Soldiers had killed fathers, burned homes. Why should this one be different? The accusation burned. Caleb lowered his hand slightly, his voice raw. "I was a soldier," he said slowly, knowing few would understand, "but no more." Ayasha seized on his words, repeating them in Apache. Her voice cracked, but she forced it louder, more insistent. She pointed to his chest, then to her own, then pressed a hand against her heart. The gesture was clear even without language. He was family now. The circle wavered. The younger warrior frowned, uncertain. But the leader's face remained unmoved. His gaze fixed on Caleb like a hawk on prey. He spoke a long sentence, the words clipped, final. Ayasha's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. She turned back to Caleb, whispering in English, "He say, you lie. He say, you die." The canyon seemed to close around him, its red walls pressing in. Caleb's pulse thundered, but not from fear of his own death. He saw Ayasha's face, saw the despair breaking through her brave mask. She had risked everything to trust him. If he fell now, her hope would fall with him. He drew a slow breath, forcing his voice steady. "Tell him this," he murmured, "I don't run." "Not anymore." Ayasha blinked at him, then translated, her voice trembling. The leader tilted his head, studying Caleb as if weighing the truth of those words. His rifle did not lower. The warriors' bows remained taut.
The silence stretched, brittle as glass. One word, one twitch, and the canyon would run red. The standoff stretched, the canyon holding its breath. Then Ayasha's voice rose again, sharper this time, urgent. She pointed to the ground, sweeping her arm as if painting the memory into the air. She mimed claws and teeth, crouched low like a wolf ready to spring. She snapped her small hands, baring her own teeth, then thrust an invisible rifle to her shoulder. She made the sound of a gunshot, kapow, her voice echoing off the cliffs. The warriors shifted uneasily, eyes flicking to one another. Ayasha wasn't finished. She clutched at her chest as if struck, then fell to her knees, miming a wolf leaping. She snapped her hands again, then mimed a revolver drawn in a blur, firing twice in quick succession. She collapsed, arms splayed, then sprang to her feet and spread her arms wide. "He fight!" she cried in English, her voice breaking. "He fight for me!" Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, eyes blazing with a mix of fear and defiance. For the first time, a ripple went through the warriors. One of the younger men, barely more than a boy, lowered his bow. His dark eyes studied Caleb with something new. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. He spoke a few words, low but steady. Ayasha turned quickly, translating in halting English. He say, "Only warrior fight wolves, only brave heart do that." Caleb felt the weight of those words. He hadn't asked to be called brave. He hadn't felt brave, not when he deserted, not when he ran from his past. But he had stood his ground for her. Maybe, in that moment, that had been enough. The leader's jaw tightened. His rifle remained raised, but his eyes shifted toward the younger warrior, then back to Ayasha. The canyon was no longer silent. It was filled with tension fraying at the edges. Doubt had entered the circle. Caleb took a slow step forward. Every bowstring tightened, but he kept his hands open, his voice steady. "I'm not here to fight you," he said, forcing the words past the dryness in his throat. "I'm here because she needs her mother." Ayasha echoed him in Apache, her small voice fierce. She pointed toward the mountains, then pressed both hands to her heart. Her plea was raw, unvarnished, impossible to ignore. For a long, heavy moment, the leader stared at her, his rifle unwavering. Then, at last, he lowered it an inch. Not surrender, only a pause. Around him, the warriors murmured. Another bow lowered, then another. The younger man stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Caleb and the leader. His voice was calm but firm. He repeated the phrase again, "Warrior heart." The leader's eyes flicked to Ayasha one last time, then back to Caleb. Slowly, with visible reluctance, he lowered his rifle. The canyon exhaled. Caleb did not move, did not dare. But inside, relief washed over him like cool water. For the first time since the ambush, he believed they might survive this. The warriors moved in close, their weapons still ready, but no longer aimed. A sharp command from the leader set the group in motion. Caleb was nudged forward, Ayasha walking at his side. Midnight followed under the watch of two riders who flanked the horse as if he were as much a prisoner as his master. They wound deeper into the canyon, the walls narrowing until Caleb wondered if they'd walk straight into solid stone. But just when the passage seemed to close entirely, the rock split open. A narrow slot widened suddenly into a great bowl of land hidden from the world beyond. Caleb stopped short. Before him stretched a valley that should not have existed in the desert. A clear stream wound its way through meadows of tall grass. Cottonwoods spread their branches wide, leaves flashing silver in the breeze. Horses grazed freely, their sleek coats shining in the late sun. Smoke curled lazily from low shelters made of bent branches and hides, scattered along the stream like beads on a necklace. And everywhere, life. Children ran, laughing, their small bodies darting between shelters.
Women carried baskets of water, herbs, or firewood. Men worked with horses or sat fletching arrows in the shade. It was not a village under siege, not a people broken and scattered as the army claimed. It was a community thriving in secret, defying the world that had tried to crush it.
Caleb's throat tightened. He had seen too many burned lodges, too many ashes where homes had been. But here was survival carved out of stone and faith. Ayesha's face lit with recognition. Her steps quickened, her eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered at the edge of the meadow. Voices rose in surprise and joy, calling her name. Hands reached for her, pulling her close, stroking her hair, touching her shoulders as though to confirm she was real. Caleb hung back, uncertain. Eyes turned toward him, dozens of them, sharp with suspicion. Mothers pulled children closer, men's hands drifted toward knives and bows. He felt their judgment pressing on him, heavier than the canyon walls. The leader barked an order, and the crowd parted. Caleb and Ayesha were ushered toward the largest shelter at the valley's heart. The structure was round, framed with willow poles and covered in hides, painted with symbols, mountains, water, and the spirals of wind. As they approached, Caleb's eyes caught the waterfall at the far side of the valley, a ribbon of silver cascading from the cliffs. The sound filled the air like a hymn, steady, eternal. For a moment, he thought of the verse his mother used to whisper when he was a boy. "He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul." The words had once felt empty, but here, in this secret valley, they breathed again. Ayesha clutched his hand suddenly, her small fingers tight. Her voice was low, trembling with hope. "Mother," she whispered. And with that single word, Caleb knew the journey had reached its most sacred turn. The air inside the great lodge was heavy with the scent of sage and smoke. Shadows flickered along the curved walls, cast by a small fire in the center. Around it sat elders and women, their faces solemn, their voices hushed. At the far side, lying on a bed of woven mats and furs, was Sakina. Her body was thin, her skin pale beneath the bronze hue of her people. Each breath came shallow, as though the very act cost her more strength than she could spare. Yet, when her eyes opened and found Ayesha, they filled with light. "My daughter," she whispered, her voice thin but clear. Her arms lifted weakly, trembling with the effort. Ayesha broke from Caleb's side and ran to her mother. She fell against her, clinging tight, her small shoulders shaking. "Mother!" The word tore from her as a sob, breaking weeks of held-back grief. Sakina's frail hand stroked her daughter's hair, smoothing the tangles, holding her close with what little strength remained. Tears traced down her cheeks, but her lips curved in a smile of pure joy. Caleb stood a few steps back, hat in hand, feeling like an intruder on something too holy for his presence. Yet Sakina's gaze turned to him, steady despite the shadows of death in her eyes. Ayesha spoke quickly in Apache, her words tumbling over one another. Caleb caught fragments: wolves, fire, soldier. He understood. She was telling her mother everything, recounting how he had fought, how he had kept his promise. Sakina listened, then beckoned him closer. Her voice was fragile, but her words carried weight. "You saved her." Caleb swallowed, his throat tight. "I only did what anyone would." A faint smile touched her lips. "Not anyone. Many would have left her, but you stayed." Her eyes grew distant, as though seeing beyond the lodge, beyond even this world. Then she whispered words that stilled the room. "The Lord says, 'Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you.'" The verse from Hebrews 13:5 hung in the air like a blessing. Caleb felt the weight of it press into his chest. He had lived as if forsaken, as if beyond grace. But here was a dying woman reminding him that God had never turned away, that perhaps this moment itself was proof of that promise. Sakina reached for Ayesha's hand, then guided it into Caleb's. "She is yours now. Protect her, love her as your own."
Ayasha's wide eyes flicked between them, her small fingers curling instinctively around his. Caleb bowed his head, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Sakina's smile deepened, serene. Her duty was done. Her daughter was safe. Outside, the waterfall thundered, eternal and unbroken. Inside, a new bond had been sealed, stronger than blood. The fire in the lodge burned low, glowing embers painting the walls in hues of amber and red. Silence pressed close, broken only by the rasp of Sakina's breathing. Elders watched from the shadows, their faces grave, knowing the moment was near. Sakina lifted a trembling hand and gestured to the medicine woman beside her.
From a small pouch, the woman produced a necklace, silver worked with turquoise, the stone smooth from generations of touch. She placed it gently in Sakina's palm. The dying mother turned to Caleb. Her eyes, though dimmed by illness, still carried the fierce light of a woman who had endured loss and refused to break. With great effort, she held the necklace out to him. "This was my mother's," she whispered, "and her mother's before her. It marks family, protector, keeper of blood." She pressed it toward his hands. "Now it is yours." Caleb hesitated. His hands shook as he reached for it, the weight of the gift heavier than steel. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, voice hoarse. Sakina's lips curved faintly. "No man deserves. He chooses. You choose now." Her words struck deep. All his life since the army, Caleb had been running, from orders he'd refused to follow, from memories of fire and screams, from the blood on his own hands. But here was a woman at the edge of eternity telling him he could choose again. Not by erasing the past, but by carrying a new future. He bowed his head, closing his fingers around the necklace. "I choose," he said, his voice steady at last. "On my life, I will guard her. I will love her as my own." Sakina exhaled, a sound that was half sigh, half prayer. "Then I go in peace." Ayasha clung to her mother's hand, whispering words in Apache through her tears. Sakina's eyes softened as she gazed at her daughter one last time. "Be strong, little one," she breathed. "Your father watches from the stars. Your mother goes to join him. But you are not alone." Her gaze shifted back to Caleb. "You are not alone." The words lingered as her chest rose once more, then slowly fell still. Her hand slipped from Ayasha's grasp. For a moment, the world itself seemed to pause. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the waterfall roared, eternal as ever. And in the lodge, a child wept softly into her new guardian's arms. Caleb held Ayasha close, the turquoise necklace heavy against his chest. It was more than a trinket. It was a covenant. He looked at the elders, meeting their eyes without flinching. He was no longer the drifter, no longer the deserter who had fled his own past. He was something else now, a protector, a father, a man with a place at last. The climax of his old life had ended with death and loss. This new one began with a vow.
If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The morning after Sakina's passing dawned quiet and cool. A thin mist rose from the stream, curling around the cottonwoods like pale smoke. In the heart of the valley, the people gathered for the burial. Caleb stood at the edge of the circle, hat in hand, the turquoise silver necklace heavy against his chest. Ayasha clung to his side, her small fingers gripping his arm as though afraid he might slip away too. The medicine woman, Nish, led the rite. Her voice rose in a low chant, old words carried on the air like the memory of wind through stone. The community answered in murmurs, their tones deep and solemn. Sakina's body lay upon a litter of branches wrapped in a deerskin robe. Her few possessions, woven bracelets, a clay bowl, a comb of carved bone, were placed beside her. Soon they would be burned, carrying her spirit free of earthly ties. The Apache way was not to cling to the dead, but to let them walk on without being called back. Ayasha's tears had dried overnight, leaving her face pale and drawn. Yet she stood straight, watching every movement with wide, unblinking eyes. Caleb's heart ached. She was a child, yet the weight she bore was already heavier than most grown men could carry. The fire was lit. Flames licked the offerings, consuming them in orange light. Smoke drifted skyward, a dark ribbon against the morning sun. Ayasha pressed closer to Caleb, whispering in a broken voice, "Go now." He knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said softly, "but she's not gone from you, Ayasha. She lives here." He touched her chest gently, over her heart. The girl's lips trembled, and she nodded. When the chanting ceased, the people began to disperse, each lingering touch upon Ayasha's head or shoulder a silent reminder. She was still theirs, still a child of this people. Yet, when their eyes slid toward Caleb, the weight of suspicion had softened. The necklace gleaming against his chest was not a token lightly given. It marked him as family, and in this valley, family was sacred. As the last embers of the fire faded, Caleb found himself staring at the smoke trailing into the blue sky. It reminded him of the words Sakina had spoken, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." He had carried abandonment like a shadow his whole life, by the army, by the world, even by himself. But perhaps God had been there all along, waiting for him to choose. Ayasha tugged at his sleeve. "Come," she said simply. Her hand slipped into his, small and warm. They walked back toward the lodge together. Children's laughter drifted across the meadow, and the waterfall's steady roar filled the air. Life pulsed on, as it always did. Caleb realized then that the Apache were not merely surviving here, they were thriving, hidden in the cleft of the earth, bound together by tradition, by sacrifice, by a faith in one another stronger than stone. He looked down at Ayasha, her face still streaked with grief, but her chin lifted with quiet resolve. She had lost more than most, yet she carried herself with the dignity of her people, a courage beyond her years. Caleb knew his life would never be the same. He was no longer just a drifter with a haunted past. He was protector now, father in all but blood. The vow he had spoken was not just to Sakina, but to the God who had spared them both. He lifted his gaze toward the cliffs rising high above the valley. The road ahead would not be easy. Soldiers still hunted, dangers still lurked. But for the first time in years, Caleb felt the weight of purpose steadier than fear. The smoke of Sakina's burial faded into the sky, but what she left behind endured. Her daughter's spirit, her gift of family, her final blessing. And Caleb Hawthorne intended to honor it with every breath left in his body. In the days that followed Sakina's burial, the valley seemed to draw Caleb deeper into its rhythms. Dawn came with the sound of roosters and children's laughter. The men rode out to hunt or scout, their ponies darting like shadows among the cliffs. Women gathered herbs, pounded corn, or wove baskets with patient hands. Life in the hidden valley moved with purpose, every soul carrying a part of the burden. At first, Caleb kept to the edges, unsure of his place. He tended midnight, repaired his gear, and watched the Apache from a respectful distance. But the necklace around his neck was not easily ignored. Wherever he went, eyes followed him, not just with suspicion, but with the weight of expectation. One morning, a young warrior approached him, offering a bow. The gesture was cautious but unmistakable, an invitation. Caleb accepted, testing its weight, feeling the smoothness of the wood. The warrior nodded once, satisfied, and walked away. It was not yet friendship, but it was the first step toward trust. Ayasha stayed close, guiding him in the ways of her people. She showed him how to find sweet water hidden in cactus, how to read the trails of rabbits and deer. In return, he taught her small tricks from his own wandering life, how to judge distance with the eye, how to mend a torn saddle strap with nothing but wire and grit. In the evenings, they sat by the fire with others. Stories flowed, tales of ancestors, of hunts and battles, of songs sung to the rhythm of drums. Caleb did not understand all the words, but the cadence sank into him, steady as the waterfall that thundered beyond the cliffs. He began to feel the threads of something he had long thought lost, belonging. Yet not all welcomed him. An older warrior, scarred from many battles, confronted him one night. His voice was sharp, his words bitter. Ayesha translated only part of it, but Caleb understood enough. White men had brought pain, death, betrayal. Why should this one be any different? Caleb did not answer with excuses. He simply touched the necklace at his chest, then placed a hand over his heart. "Family," he said, in the broken Apache he had learned. "I protect." The warrior studied him for a long moment, then turned away. No acceptance, not yet, but no denial either. Caleb knew it would take time. Trust was not granted with a word, but built with deeds. One evening, as Ayesha slept by the fire, Caleb walked to the edge of the valley. The cliffs glowed red under the setting sun, the waterfall shining like molten silver. He lifted his eyes heavenward, where the first stars began to pierce the twilight. He thought of his past, of Crying Woman Creek, of the faces of the fallen, of the court-martial he had fled. For years he had carried the weight of guilt like a chain. But here, in this place of stone and stream, he felt something shift. Not erasure, redemption. The past was carved into him like scars in rock, but it no longer ruled him. A verse stirred in his memory, one his mother had spoken in his boyhood. "If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." The words felt alive now, echoing in his chest. He was not the man he had been. He had been given a new life, a new name, protector, father, family. He turned back to the fire, where Ayesha stirred in her sleep, curling closer into her blanket. A faint smile touched his lips. He had a purpose now, carved by God's hand in the most unlikely of places. The desert had tested him, the wolves had scarred him, but grace had found him. And in the heart of the hidden valley, Caleb Hawthorne finally came home. Stories like Caleb and Ayesha's remind us that the West was not only about gunfights and dust storms. It was about people searching for redemption, for family, for a place to belong. Many of you watching have carried your own burdens, felt the sting of loss, or searched for a second chance. In the quiet courage of this drifter and the fierce hope of a child, we see something eternal, that love, sacrifice, and faith can carve light even in the darkest canyons. Perhaps it stirs a memory in you of your own mother's words, a father's steady hand, or a promise you once made and kept. That is the heartbeat of true Wild West stories, not legend, but life. If this tale moved you, I invite you to subscribe, share your thoughts below, and join us for more journeys into the soul of the frontier.